What's going on, everybody? Welcome in to the NFL Week 16 betting edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Nick Whalen. He's John McKechnie. We're taking you through Week 16. We each have three games that we want to discuss. And, John, just a fascinating Week 16 board in front of us this week. We got a couple of big favorites, the Bills and the Packers pushing 2 touchdowns. Saw some line movement already in that Giants-Falcons game. Falcons are 10-point favorites at some shops right now. But plenty of tight spreads on the board and a nice diverse schedule for us. We still get the Thursday game, Broncos Chargers. We got 2 games on Saturday. We got the full Sunday slate. We're back down to 1 Monday night game. Very much looking forward to breaking all this down in detail with you. I want to start, though, with asking you about one of those Saturday games, John. And again, we're recording this on Tuesday, so still a lot of news, especially on the injury side of things, that will break over the next few days. But are you looking to get any early action in on this Texans-Chiefs game with Patrick Mahomes' status up in the air?
Yeah, this is obviously the storyline of the week, and our feet are kind of getting held to the fire with this one coming on Saturday. And then, of course, the Chiefs playing again just a few days later on Christmas. So obviously Patrick Mahomes is the most important player in the entire NFL, and the Chiefs know what's ahead of them. They're going for that three-peat. And, you know, they're going to kind of have to do this risk-reward balancing act here to decide if this game is worth, sitting Mahomes. The line certainly seems to suggest that he will not be playing. But, again, it's only Tuesday, so we still have some time to go. But, yeah, to see the Chiefs as 2-point home underdogs, that's kind of a strong statement there, even against the Texans, and it's interesting because you wouldn't have, if Mahomes was playing, what's the look ahead, or what would have the look ahead been, like 4.5 for the Chiefs, something like that. And I would have been queasy about that on the Chiefs side of things because frankly they haven't played well. I think you laid it out really well on the kind of Monday recap pod, just how poorly the Chiefs played, especially on offense on Sunday against the Browns. So they're not clicking on all cylinders whatsoever, and it doesn't really feel like reinforcements are coming. It doesn't feel like Pacheco's going to tap back into that vintage form of his. I mean, they might get Hollywood Brown back, but how much of a splash is that? I could have used that in my best ball interest personally, but too little, too late on that one. But regardless, I think at this stage. At this stage, I might take the Chiefs in the points just because I'm kind of that out on Houston at the moment that even Carson Wentz just playing handoff ball could be enough for the Chiefs to stay within this number.
Of course, it's the Texans on the schedule of this situation, right? I think there could be like 20 other teams that they'd be playing, and I would say, if it's Carson Wentz out there, I feel pretty decent about most teams taking care of business against him, but. How do you trust the Texans right now, right? Yeah, they're coming off a big win over Miami this past week, but I mean, Miami had like 7 opportunities to take control of that game. And, despite getting 4 2 turnovers, you still only win by 1 score. You still only put up 20 points. They finished with under 200 yards in terms of total offense. So I have a lot of questions on both sides. It's closer to a stay away for me. I think I would actually I might lean Houston here. I think the only thing really keeping the Chiefs afloat has been the late game Patrick Mahomes heroics, and I think if you remove that from the equation, you're left with what's been just kind of a dead team offensively for 7 or 8 weeks in a row now. They just played their worst offensive game of the year this past week from a yards per play perspective against that Cleveland team, and the Browns turned it over 6 times, man. 6 times, and this was still like a competitive game throughout, despite all those turnovers. So it's not a game that's going to make my card. We'll reveal those picks very shortly. But I think if anything, I would maybe look at the under 40.5. You can get that right now at FanDuel. There are some 39.5s out there as well. I think if we get the official word that it is Carson Wentz later in the week, which again, that is my personal expectation, is that it likely is Carson Wentz. I think that number does move a little bit lower. And I mean, even with Patrick Mahomes fully healthy, I don't know that I'd feel great about these teams combining for 41 plus points. So you take Mahomes out of the mix. I think we see an ultra conservative offensive game from the Kansas City Chiefs. And obviously we can't trust Houston a whole lot on that end right now. But let's get to the board, John. We will each pick 3 games that we want to discuss. As always, I'll let you lead it off. Where are you taking us first?
I will take us to the other Saturday game. So we got the Ravens and the Steelers, this one in Baltimore. And I think there's a bit of sticker shock in this one when you see The Ravens favored by 6 points in this one. We obviously saw earlier on this season, the Steelers were able to beat the Ravens, not super handily, but they certainly got the job done against Baltimore up in Pittsburgh back in November. Recent history dictates that the Steelers have kind of owned this rivalry. They are, I think, 8-1 in the last 9 meetings that they've had. But I think it's also important to note that Lamar Jackson has only had one start at home against the Steelers since 2020, and it was in 2020. So it's been a minute. Last year they had the 1 seed wrapped up, and it was Week 18, and then he was injured for the ends of the 2021 and 22 seasons as well. So those were tough times. Although Tyler Huntley, Pro Bowler, but I digress. But I do think that the bloom's coming off the rose a little bit with this Steelers team of late. I don't feel like they've played extremely well. I think they lost to the Eagles just the way that the Ravens did it as well. But some costly stuff going on of late. TJ Watt getting nicked up in that game late with that foot injury. Now you got a short week after a physical game like the one in Philly last week, and Pickens has missed the last couple of games. We're not sure what version of him we're going to get, and the Steelers really don't have a ton of playmaking depth behind Pickens, and we've become keenly aware of that over the last couple of weeks. I do think that the Steelers kind of got some breaks in that first matchup where Justin Tucker was missing field goals, and they're kind of like flexing on the Ravens with Boswell just kicking bombs. I don't know if that necessarily is going to change here, to be clear, but there was like a very fluky turnover on the Ravens' part in that game when the Ravens kind of had a chance to storm back a little bit. So some breaks did go Pittsburgh's way. It is in Baltimore, and I do kind of expect the public to be heavy on Pittsburgh just because of the sheer total or the sheer spread here of it being 6 points. I'm going to say lay the wood here. I think the Ravens get back even to 1-1 against the Steelers on the year, and all of a sudden this AFC North race gets really interesting down the stretch.
All right, John. We try not to overlap on this show, but I also have the Baltimore Ravens on my card, and I like another one of your picks as well, which we'll get to later in the show. We couldn't double up on 2 of them, but I allowed myself to double up here, so I will build on everything you just said about Baltimore. And obviously, you got to be wary of Mike Tomlin as a dog. Historically, these have been good spots, to say the least, for Pittsburgh. But I think this is a huge revenge spot for Baltimore to avenge that early loss, 18-16. Just an ugly game, right? They had 2 missed field goals. They had 3 killer turnovers. It was the only multi-turnover game of the season for the Baltimore Ravens, which is insane. You could make a pretty strong argument that they played their worst game of the year and still almost won that game on the road. So I don't think that many things go against the Ravens this time. And Derrick Henry fumbled on the second play from scrimmage. They had that bizarre Isaiah Likely fumble right before half that handed another field goal to the Steelers. They held the Steelers without a touchdown in that game and still lost. I don't think we see that again. And like you said, Pittsburgh, coming off a physical game in which they, didn't even get close to 200 total yards against Philly. Baltimore is basically coming off of a bye, a tune-up game, if you will, against the FCS New York Giants. I think that allows them to kind of work out some things after their late bye. And you mentioned the injuries, right? I mean, TJ Watt, I know he says he's optimistic about playing. I think he's probably out there. Is he 100%? I'm not sure. George Pickens, who knows? That feels like a 50-50 to me. He's already missed 2 games. There hasn't been a lot of clarity on the hamstring. And if Pickens isn't out there, or if Pickens isn't 100%, I mean, there is just no explosive play potential for the Steelers offense. They put up 163 yards last week on the Eagles. They caught some breaks in that game as well. Some fluky turnovers by Philly that they were unable to take advantage of. They only had 267 yards of total offense 2 weeks ago against Cleveland. I think a lot of things working in the Ravens' favor. And, with this staying under 7, I am with you on Baltimore -6. Where are we going next year, John? I know you got a total that you like this week.
I do. So we'll go back to the well. We were 1-1 on the totals last week. So not great, but I'm not discouraged either. And we were pretty close on the Dallas Carolina one, but alas, only really matters in horseshoes and hand grenades. But we're going back to the well. We will go to the Rams and Jets matchup in the Meadowlands. I like the over 46, which feels weird to say, given how the Rams played last week offensively. What was that, like a 12-6 game? And And the Jets, on balance over the course of the season have not been a particularly high-flying offense, but the Jets have been respectable against the total this year, 8-6 to the over, 3-3 at home. The Rams are 7-7 as far as totals are concerned, 3-4 to the over on the road. It is going to be cold. It's going to be really cold.
It is
in the Meadowlands. It's going to be a high of 23. How's LA going to handle that? I think that's a totally a fair question. Overs were 3-1 in December for the Jets home games late last season, although those were much lower numbers. We're talking like 33.5, 36 and 41.5. But again, I think that this Jets offense is starting to find something, and it's not just because, and I'm not rubbing it in, it wasn't just the fact that it was the Jags last week. Like they had shown some flashes the week before, and Rodgers that kind of broke that streak of the 300 passing yard drought, got that out of the way. Devontae Adams had the monster game. Garrett Wilson had a solid game that was obviously overshadowed by Adams. So I think that the Jets are going to be able to get kind of move the ball at will here. I'm interested to see how the run game does it against a Los Angeles based defense playing it in the cold. And I think that Stafford can keep things going. And I think the Rams bounce back. I'm not going to grade them too harshly for playing in kind of like a monsoon condition early on in that game. Really intense divisional game, season on the line for the Niners in that one. So that was a tough spot, and they found a way to win. But I don't see them being held to 12 points. I think that this Jets defense is kind of a little suspect, even still. And yeah, so I think we see this one in the 20s on all sides around, and I think we see an over 46.
Okay. Interesting take on this game. I would lean Rams -3 here. If anything, the Jets offense has earned back some respect over the last couple of weeks, and perhaps rightfully so. I mean, three of their highest scoring games, their three highest scoring games, I should say, have all come in the last 4 weeks. So I think the passing game has turned a corner. You mentioned it against the Jags. You got to be wary. I mean, it's been the 32nd ranked pass defense in terms of EPA for virtually the entire season. 25 of the 32 points for the Jets came in the second half last week against Jacksonville. Hit a couple big plays to Devontae Adams, which I'm not even that big of a respecter of the Rams defense. I still think there are some holes there, but it's a hell of a lot better than the Jags defense. So I worry about the Jets holding up their end of the bargain here. But you do have two quarterbacks who excel in cold weather, right? I mean, Matthew Stafford has been a fantastic cold weather quarterback throughout his career among active players. He has the highest yards per game in sub 40 degree weather, close to 300 yards per game. Rodgers obviously has dealt with this throughout his entire career with both the Jets and the Packers. So I like your inclination here. If you're willing to trust the Jets offense, which is a shaky proposition week to week, I think the Rams do their part here. I see the Rams, putting up somewhere between 24 and 30 points. If you think the Jets can just get to even 21, 24 in this spot, then I think you should be in good shape there. So your second game, you are taking Rams Jets over 46. John, I'm taking a dog here. I'm taking the San Francisco 49ers. They're +1.5 right now on the road at Miami. I know everybody's down on San Francisco last week, perhaps rightfully so. You put up 6 points in a must-win game against the LA Rams at home. It was disappointing, but I'm trying not to hold that game too much against them. I think the conditions obviously played a massive, massive part. I think if Deebo Samuel just squeezes that catch over the middle, maybe the 49ers win that game, and we see a much different number here. There is the potential for that just being the dream crusher, right? It's like, your season's over. Do you bring it with that same level of intensity this week? But I also don't trust the Dolphins in this spot whatsoever. I mean, they had, like we said, opportunity after opportunity to win that game last week and put up 12 points in an absolute must-win game that was there for the taking. Miami cannot run the ball whatsoever. It was yet another one of those 14 for 40 games for Devon Achane, which is that's just what happens every single week now for Miami. I don't think that changes against the Niners defense that has bodies back. Jalen Waddle is banged up. I don't know if he's going to play. That feels 50-50 at best. You're taking another weapon away from a team that already can't generate big plays whatsoever. Dolphins are 2-5 against the number at home this season. And who are the Dolphins to be favored here? Really? I know they're at home, but who are their wins? They beat Jacksonville. They beat New England. They beat New England again. They beat Vegas. They beat the Jets in overtime in a game they should have lost. Really, the only good win to me on the ledger for the Dolphins is that Week 10 win on the road at the LA Rams. That at the time felt like the Dolphins re-announcement that, hey, we're back in the playoff picture. ever since then, it's kind of looked like the same old team. Again, they don't generate big plays. They can't run the ball. This team, when they were rolling last year, everything runs through the ground, and you're not seeing the Tyreek Hill explosive 65-yard gain or Jalen Waddle 75-yard touchdown. Those are just not a part of the offense this season. And again, I don't think that changes against the San Francisco team. So I think the Niners are a markedly better team still. I know they're sitting at 6-8. I know it's been a disappointing year. I know they have injuries, but I think they cover the 1.5, and I think they go and win this game in Miami.
I like that call. This is a game where it's hard to trust either side of it, and San Francisco does qualify as one of those teams that theoretically the Dolphins could beat. I forget what the exact stat was, but under McDaniel, they have a putrid record against any team that is 500 or better. But Niners aren't quite there. But
Doesn't
even
qualify.
still, we're in a spot here where you're getting points. It's not a lot of points, but you're getting points, and it's not like Miami has this kind of dominant home field advantage. It is a long trip, of course, for the Niners, but they get a little bit of an extra rest advantage. And the Dolphins have just kind of let down over the last couple of weeks. Like, they really had a chance to make a serious case at a playoff push, and they bamboozled me. I loved them last week in that game against the Texans, but it was not meant to be. If you can hold your nose here and trust the Niners one more time here, I think this is the spot to do it.
I'm doing it. We're taking the Niners plus 1.5. We're pairing that with Baltimore -6. Your third and final game, John. Curious to see where you're taking us for this one. Could it be a divisional matchup, perhaps?
It could, and it's not even that far from where the Ravens Steelers game will be played, but it will be on the following day. But we're going to the nation's capital. We got the Commanders hosting the Eagles, and a couple weeks ago, I was like, "Is this a donkey bet?" I forget which pick it was, but it was the donkey bet. I think it was the
Eagles
Bears.
Panthers.
Okay, yeah, and I think I was also like on the Bears getting points against the Niners, so that's been kind of a house of horrors for me. But this kind of like rings the same bell to me, where it's like, why is Philly only a 3.5 point favorite here? I mean, you look at how Washington played last week and how they've kind of been playing largely since Jaden Daniels got banged up with that rib injury. It just hasn't been great. He gets sacked 8 times last week by the Saints. They get by that game by the skin of their teeth. Just a rough outing from them, and they're not quite at a point where they can do the look ahead stuff. And even if they were, Jay Kaner and Spencer Rattler shouldn't put that level of a scare in you. And that I think you mentioned on the pod that Washington had chances to just kind of bury the Saints, and they just didn't. So Eagles come to town. The Eagles looked great against the Commanders last time. The Eagles looked great last week against the Steelers. The Eagles are 6-1 against the spread on the road this year. I just think that they're a really bad matchup for Washington personnel-wise, and particularly in the trenches. Like, if it's something that Mario and I talked about with some skepticism towards this Washington team coming into the year. It's like, you look at that offensive line, that might be the worst in the league, and it hasn't played that way. It hasn't been that bad over the course of the season, but it feels like the chickens are coming home to roost a little bit. There's not a lot of talent on that front for Washington protecting Jaden Daniels, and that's a bit of a problem when you have this Eagles front seven bearing down on you. So this could be a really tough day on offense for Washington, and I just have no doubts about the way this Eagles offense can operate, especially on the ground. Love to see if Saquon's good to go 100%, but I mean, Kenny G looked pretty good last week in relief as well, and you can obviously run Jalen Hurts a little bit as well. So give me the Eagles here.
Yeah, this is the other one that I'm in agreement with on you. I love the Eagles here. I don't feel like the market is quite adjusted on this game. You look at the first matchup, it was a 1-score game. Technically, Eagles won 26-18. They outgained Washington 434 to 264. They put up 2 more yards per play on the day, but they missed 2 field goals. They were 1 of 3 in the red zone. They left a ton of points on the board in that matchup. And I think the Philly defense is going to be ready for this Washington team that, like you said, struggled for most of that game against the Saints last week. And, some of it was protection issues. Some of it was, kind of shooting themselves in the foot with some bad penalties. Washington was lucky to escape that game with a straight up victory. Probably should have lost the way they played in the second half. Like you mentioned, Philly's been great on the road, 7-1 ATS on the road or neutral sites this season, obviously including the Brazil game. And I don't like this narrative that, Philly seemingly like caved to either external or internal pressure and was like, we need to throw the ball 30 plus times last week just to show that we can. But it worked. And all of a sudden now it feels like that could be a bigger part of this offense. And it's almost not something that you felt like you had to prepare for the last 6 or 7 weeks in the same way maybe that you do now with AJ Brown reawoken and Devontae Smith reawoken. We also have injuries, of course, on the Washington side of things. They'll be without Zach Ertz. Austin Eckler is still on IR. And I look back at that first matchup against Philly. And again, Philly dominated just about every aspect of that game. Should have been a bigger final result than it was. Austin Eckler accounted for 41% of the Commanders' offense. 41%, either on receptions or on the ground. And you take him out of the mix, it just becomes Brian Robinson. I thought Robinson was a huge letdown for fantasy purposes last week. That should have been a great spot against New Orleans, and Washington just could not get it done. So I don't feel like the Commanders are carrying over any momentum. It feels like the Eagles are just continuing to get better and better as the season rolls along. They have advantages all over the place. So I am with you on Philly -3.5. All right, John, for my final game, I'm going to a total here. I've been kind of staying away from the unders these last few weeks, but I have a couple that I like. And I will say Cincy Cleveland is one of them. But one that I like slightly more is the Giants and the Falcons. A battle of the Titans in Atlanta. The total for this game is hanging up at 41.5. We have two very bad offenses here, and we have no idea who's going to be playing quarterback for the Giants. Could it be Tommy DeVito? Could it be Drew Lock? Could it be Tim Boyle? We don't know. I don't know if it matters. I think all those guys are almost equally bad options. Meanwhile, the Atlanta Falcons just scored 15 points against the Las Vegas Raiders on Monday Night Football. They got a safety in there. They had a missed field goal. They put 2 field goals on the board. They're also scared to kick the ball beyond like 45 yards, which I think is something to keep an eye on the rest of the way and something that helps me feel better about this under. They've scored 15, 21, 13, 6, and 7 points over their last 5 games, respectively. The passing game is a complete mess. I saw a good stat on Twitter last night that they faced 24 first and 10 situations last night and ran the ball 23 times in those situations. This has become a conservative offense. It's been an offense that has to scheme around the limitations of Kirk Cousins. They're basically just trying to, when they face an inferior team like Vegas or the Giants, they're playing not to lose. They're just kind of, let's not make some mistakes. Let's keep the ball on the ground. Let's run clock. And let's use our advantages. So I don't see this as an explosive play offense by any means. The one explosive that they had in that Raiders game was a completely busted coverage by the Las Vegas defense. And granted, that could certainly happen when we're talking about the Giants defense, but I think those opportunities will end up being few and far between. And then, the Giants side of things here, they're averaging 13.2 points per game over their last 9. So we're dipping back into the Daniel Jones tenure when we're talking about that sample. And, against the run, this team has actually been pretty decent. I know they're down Dexter Lawrence, and that's huge. But when they're not facing a mobile quarterback, they've actually been a pretty good run defense this season. Atlanta, they're just in survival mode. They want to get in, win this game, get out, stay in the NFC South mix. They're not hunting big plays. They're trying to avoid disaster. So I think Atlanta wins this game. I'm not sure they cover, but I do like the under 41.5. I think we see a lot of running, a lot of sloppiness, and a low-scoring game.
Yeah, short game here. Maybe could rival the Titans Jags game from a couple weeks ago, where he's like came in like 2 hours and 45 minutes,
Yep.
Just a sprint there. And I saw another interesting stat. I think this was from Hayden Winks over at Underdog. I forget if it was completions or attempts, but the Falcons, I'll say attempts. The Falcons have attempted 3 passes from outside the pocket with Kirk Cousins this year.
Yeah, I saw that stat as well. Outside the tackle box, that checks out, man. He's not moving. And
No.
even after a win against Vegas the other night, Raheem Morris, essentially called him out in the post-game presser. Was like, yeah, we need better quarterback play right now. And I think they're going to keep rolling with Cousins as long as they're in the playoff picture. And again, I think this is going to be a very limited offense.